Hello cactus and succulent growers, I'm Lynn and welcome to Desert Plants of Avalon, and in today's video I'm going to be talking to you about all of the cactus jobs that you need to be doing now it's the fall, autumn. Now I've also made a whole video on how to prepare your cactus for the winter, and I go into a lot of detail on there and how to actually prepare your cacti for the winter, because although it's only fall and autumn now and hopefully we've still got a little bit of the growing season left and winter's not here yet, plants are not ready to give up just yet with the flowering, not for me anyway. You do need to think about preparing your plants for the winter, so do check that video out after you've watched this one that go into a lot of information on there, and I'll link that video up above. Now then guys, I'm sure many of you are aware we're currently waiting on a greenhouse that's going to be going down the bottom of the garden there, so it's a little bit of a different video compared to what I normally do. I love to obviously do videos on the plant jobs to do with each season. So although what I'm saying I'm going to be doing with my plants as well, it's going to be a little bit different for me this year because I may have to bring a lot of these into the house temporarily until we have the greenhouse up. But the first one you need to obviously be aware of, if you can call it a job as such, is to stop watering. Now, most of the cacti will be entering or getting ready to enter their winter rest period sort of at the end of September, sort of mid-October. By then a lot of them will have finished flowering and budding, and that's when you really need to cut back and stop watering. Now this is obviously different for any of the epiphytic cacti such as the Schlumbergeras and Rhipsalis, and many of the autumn sort of growing succulents such as the euphorbias. I find a lot of my euphorbias tend to take a bit of a growth period around sort of the early fall time. But with the majority of all of the cacti, the desert cacti, it's really important that you stop watering roughly by sort of the beginning, the absolute maximum middle of October. Now this can obviously depend on many things. First of all is your climate, and obviously when I'm talking about the jobs to do in fall and autumn, I'm talking about if you live in the northern hemisphere such as I do in Ireland. Obviously for other people in the southern hemisphere it'll be all spring now and it's going to be completely the opposite. You're going to be starting up the watering. But this is important with the watering because cacti need to be fully dry to go into their winter rest period, and especially if you're keeping them in a greenhouse or a room that is unheated, which is the best thing to do, because if you keep them in a warm room or you heat your greenhouse too much or your conservatory, they can carry on growing in the winter, and with the lack of light they can grow stretched and also fail to flower the following year. They need that winter rest. So obviously cut back on watering now, and if you're watching this video in the future, this is actually September now for me. So obviously when I had all my plants in the polytunnel I would sort of cut back on watering now, and then by the beginning of October I'd totally stop, because I have these all outdoors and they're sort of protected by tables. I do have some that are in the garden. I don't have any protection regarding the rain at the moment, so I'm going to have to probably bring all of these into the house by the end of September. So they've got plenty of time to dry out before we have the new greenhouse up, which could be another couple of months. And this is very important, because if I just kept them all out here and they got rained on and then it got cold, then I put them into the greenhouse, which might not be here till November or even later. Wet plants in a cold environment, it causes rot, especially when they're dormant. The light levels are dropping now. I'm sure many of you will agree that the mornings and the evenings are getting dark, and the plants respond to that and they slow down. I still have many sort of coming into bud still that have been reblooming, as you can see there, and my plants sort of carry on going for a little bit into the early October, so they're not ready to completely have their rest yet, but they will be slowing down. So cut down on the watering now if you're watching this sort of in the middle of September, and I would recommend completely stop watering from, you know, the end of September, beginning of October, middle of October maximum. As I say, it does depend on your climate. If you're living in a warmer climate where plants are going to dry out quite quick and you've got nice warm temperatures still for the time of year, you may need to continue watering a bit longer. Also, if you have them in a sunny window as well. But if you're like me, have them outside or in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, cut back, because you want to make sure they're fully dry. The drier they are when they come for the winter rest, they're more sort of they can withstand colder temperatures as well. Now I used to heat my polytunnel at 5 Celsius, 41 Fahrenheit. So when I get the greenhouse, I'm going to be heating it the same at that minimum temperature, and that makes the majority of all the cacti that can take that temperature, overwinter well without any fear of rotting. And that also, the cold temperatures and dry also helps to encourage more blooms the following year. So that is the most important one, is cut back on watering now and then stop watering altogether from October. Also, when it comes to cutting down on watering, obviously cacti that you have in large pots that take a lot longer to dry out, such as this big old golden barrel here, you need to stop watering much sooner. This one is actually I take out during the daytime when it's dry, and actually take it then into the house of an evening to protect it from any rain, and I bring it in on rainy days, because although I had this out all during the spring and summer and it loved being rained on, it needs to dry out fully before I put it into the new greenhouse. So this is what I've stopped watering, and I have it out during the day when it's nice and dry like today, but take it in on the rainy days. And such as this one here, this big echinopsis, again in a big pot, that's one I've stopped watering now and bring in on the rainy days and bring in over night time. So plants you've got in very large pots, obviously now it is September, middle of September, I would recommend probably stopping watering altogether. And obviously it's different for the smaller cacti. Now the next one will be making plans to bring any other plants indoors that are not cold hardy. And I know many growers would just put their cacti out for the spring and summer months and then take them in for winter. But if you're like me, going to be putting them into a greenhouse or an unheated room and things like that, and you've got plants that are very sensitive to the cold, that ideally can't take lower than 10°C, 50 Fahrenheit, then I'd recommend bringing them into the house. And it can depend on what type of cactus you are growing, because some are a lot more cold hardier than others, and some are more tropical, such as Obermania. That one is one that has to have winter warmth there, which is this beauty here. And also other types as well, such as mellow cactus. They're not cold hardy. And euphorbias that people very wrongly think are cactus, but they're just a succulent, not a cactus. They're not cold hardy. They do need to come in for the winter at a minimum temperature of 10°C, 50 Fahrenheit. So make a note of any plants that you have to bring indoors for winter. And it's always good to start that early, because you can never plan the weather. You could think, oh, it's mild now, and it can just turn, you know, cold literally overnight. So be prepared. Bring in any plants. Now it is September, as I mentioned, they're practically coming to the end of their growing season, and mostly their budding season and blooming as well. All but the odd few. Then do think about bringing indoors any plants that are not cold hardy. The next one will be checking for pests, and as I mentioned, again, we're checking under the pots. This is very important, especially when you're bringing plants into the house as well. It's not just checking for mealybugs and spider mites and all the other pests. If you're bringing plants in, it's really important you lift them up, not only for mealybugs but for slugs and other unwelcome guests that you really don't want in your house or collection. So this is important, because Again, as the temperatures are dropping, there's lots of insects love to sort of hibernate under the pots and in between your plants. So this is very important. And what I love to use, I've got the rubbing alcohol here, isopropyl alcohol. This is great for mealybugs. And I put some into a little spray bottle. And if I've got very hairy, sort of spiny cacti, or the example with the mammillaria is very difficult to remove with just a Q-tip, I will spray them then with this, and that I do that regularly if I see any pests. Not there's any on this, I just want to show you an example, and go through. When I'm bringing all of these in, obviously before we have the greenhouse up, I'm going to be going through every single one and checking thoroughly, lifting the pots up, checking for pests and everything like that. It's a lot of work, but you really want to make sure your plants are as pest free as possible. Also, I know people who would treat their whole collection for the winter, whether they bring them in or whether they're in a greenhouse, with a systemic. It can be hard to get a good quality systemic anymore because a lot of pests are resistant to them and you can't get the chemicals you used to get. But if you're in a country where you've got a good quality systemic, that's often good. One you can spray on, so you treat your collection over the winter, and any insect pests then will die off. I'm not one that really is a big fan of chemicals, but sometimes you have to resort to them measures when it comes to mealybugs, spider mites and all the others. I love to use neem oil during the spring and summer months as well. That helps to keep a lot of beasties away, as long as you use it regularly. It's more of a prevention, but it works really well if you can keep up with it. So obviously checking for pests. As I say, I have the spray, and I also put a little bit in a bowl as well on there, and I will dab off any I can reach with the brush, or I use the spray if I can't reach them because they're too spiny or too hairy. Now what I like to do as well in the winter time, and I'm just going to show you a bit of an example here, because obviously, you know, it's not winter yet, but I always like to go around, and once I've cleaned all the tables and all the plants are put away, a bit of diatomaceous earth, a little bit onto a brush here. And you can use a big powder brush as well, and I just very gently tap it over the plants and onto the top of the soil and all around the tables as well. And I have made a whole video on this as well, so I'll link up above also to a video on diatomaceous earth and how I use it and everything, because it's absolutely great. Because a light dusting of this, and then any extra I'll just blow off there, tap it onto the pots, tap it all around the tables, and this prevents any crawlies, any sort of crawling, any pests that are remaining from sort of crawling along the tables, going underneath the pots and onto your other plants. It acts as a bit of a prevention, because diatomaceous earth, it's fossilised remains, the diatoms, that is millions of years old, and although it's soft to touch to us, it feels like talcum powder. To crawling insects such as mealybugs and mites and all them other nasty beasties, it can rip them to shreds. So it's great to sort of sprinkle around the tables and on top of the plants, just a light dusting over them. And this will also help to prevent any pests on your plants over the winter time. Obviously, you've got to think about preparing for the winter. It's still only fall and autumn, but we have the winter coming up. And if you do overwinter your cacti in greenhouses and polytunnels or in other rooms, you need to make sure that you have you have all electrics that you use, such as grow lights, heaters, all in working order. I have a greenhouse heater that I had in my polytunnels, absolutely brilliant. It has a thermostat set at 5C, 41 Fahrenheit, and it is a very, very good heater. And I always make sure that it's obviously working okay. However, because it's electric, and you can never trust electricity if you have power cuts in the winter with storms and things like that, I will be getting a backup heater as well, probably an oil heater. And although they're not the best for cacti because they need to be kept dry, they don't want the humidity. If it's only short term, if your electricity cuts off, at least they're going to have some type of heat. So that's important to check, things like heaters, grow lights, and you have backup and things like that for everything you need over the winter. Also things like insulation as well, bubble wrap, fleece cloth for cacti. A lot of people that I know, growers here in Ireland actually, don't heat their greenhouses at all. They just throw a bit of fleece cloth over when it's forecast minus temperatures. I'm not brave enough to do that. I prefer to use a heater, but it could be good backup as well if you want a bit of extra protection for your plants. Stock up on lots of fleece cloth, and we're going to be bubble wrapping our new greenhouse when we get it. So I'm going to obviously show you how we're going to be bubble wrapping and insulating it and all that. So that's going to be fun. But that is important as well, to make sure you're well prepared for when you're overwintering your plants, that everything is in working order and you've got plenty of winter supplies. Now, I have made a video when I had my polytunnel a couple of years ago on how I heat and insulate my polytunnel over the winter months, and I'm going to be doing the same thing when we have the greenhouse as well, with the bubble wrap and everything else. So if you want to know a bit more about that, and also the type of heater that I use as well in the greenhouse, do check that video out. I'll link that video up above. Do go ahead and watch it after this one. The next one is always quite an exciting one, and that is to go around checking your plants for any seed pods. And I love to sort of pollinate a lot of the flowers and get seed like that, for example, and then collect them, put them into these little baggies, collect the seeds. And you may not be able to sow them till next spring, but it's great to have something to look forward to. And by the way, you can sow in winter time when everything is quiet, especially if you have grow lights, and you can give them additional heat. But I've made a complete video on how to grow cactus from seed. So if you've been able to find seed pods on your plants and you've been able to save them, then you can plan ahead with sowing seed. Do go ahead and watch that video. I'll link that video up above. So collecting any seeds, and I've made many playlists on my channel on how to collect seed, harvesting seed on many different types of cactus. So do go ahead and watch that playlist. I'll also link that playlist up above. Next one will be, as well as looking for seed pods, is to removing dead flower heads, ones that you know are not going to go into seeds. And for an example here, I've got two new buds on this lovely Astrophytum, Myriostigma quadricostatus. What a name. But this one is clearly gone. There's not going to be any seed on that. So I always get a long-handled tweezers and get that. And this is important because mealybugs and other type of pests really love to hide in between old flowers, and it's good to remove them for the hygiene reasons. Still buds on this Echinopsis, so there's still chance they could flower even on my Astrophytum there, but you can always tell when flowers have completely gone, that they dry up. And there's a seed pod on one of my Parodias there, so that's going to be harvested soon. And these here, you can clearly tell they're completely dry, so this can come off again with the tweezers. There you go, no seed on that. And quite often when I remove dried up flower heads, sometimes you can pick them off with your fingers, yeah. Sometimes there can be signs of pests on the top because mealybugs love to hide there. That's a bit of diatomaceae, so if I sprinkled on, no, that's fine. And that's what you need to do. Just go around and pick any dead flower heads, so neaten up the plants. And that always keeps a lot of pests as well and disease away by removing any dead bits. Same with dead leaves and dead pads on plants, such as a Pontia here. So have a good scooty round your collection. I'm just trying to see if I can show you any more examples here. Nope, I think that's it. Now the next one will be making sure that the tables or shelves, or wherever you're growing your cacti and succulents, that it's kept as clean and tidy as possible. As you can see, showing you here one of my tables, and because I've had the plants outside, every bit of wind blows all the soil and bits of twigs and everything about. So I always come in here at least every other day, or when it's not too windy. Anything that comes off there, and I make sure I move the pots away as well. It's important to keep the area clean. This is especially important as well. This time of year, a lot of the dead flower heads will be falling off, and if they stuck in between pots and it's not clean, it's where pests and other type of annoying things like fungus and that can harbour around the in between your plants. Now, although it's the fall and the autumn, it can be good as well to do any last minute repottings. In fact, I know many growers who love to repot their cacti in the winter because they pot them up in dry soil, obviously dry cactus soil, keep them dry over the winter. They either put them back in their greenhouses or on the shelves wherever they've got them, and then they're all ready for the upcoming spring. They've had chance to sort of settle into the new soil and the pots, and then they're all ready for the spring. Because let's face it, there's a lot more time on your hands in winter with growing cacti than there is in the spring and summer, when there's lots going on with them and things like that. I would normally always repot spring and summer or early fall, but I think this year I'm going to take an example of some of my cactus friends who repot in winter, because I've had so many that I need to repot. And when we bring a lot of these into the house while we're waiting for the greenhouse, it'll give me plenty of time to repot a lot of them and then pot them up into dry cactus soil, keep them dry, then put them into the new greenhouse all in their new pots and soil, and then they've got all through the winter to sort of settle in there and rest, and then they're all ready for the upcoming growing season in the sort of March to April 2026. Yes, I'm planning that far ahead, guys. But you can do, if you've got plants you really want to repot now, you can go ahead and do it. Just make sure that you, which I always say anyway, hold back on watering them. Especially at the time of year with the winter, just pot them up into dry soil and leave them. If they're still actively growing or your climate is still quite warm, pot them up into dry cactus soil and leave them dry for a week to 10 days before giving them a tiny bit of water, and just enough to let them settle in. But any I'm going to be repotting now are going to be kept dry now until next spring anyway. So, it's not too late to do a bit of repottings now, guys. Now, with Schlumbergera cacti, commonly known as the Christmas and Thanksgiving cacti, this is sort of the time of year when you start to see buds starting to appear on them. And this is my old Thanksgiving cactus, Schlumbergera truncata. And I think I can actually start to see the very beginnings of buds just starting up there at the ends. I don't know whether you can see there, the very beginnings. And my Christmas cactus, Schlumbergera bucklei, usually comes into bud much later, usually from the sort of November time. But usually from this sort of mid-September onwards, the buds start to appear. And obviously these are cacti that you are still going to want to water, because this is when they're actively coming into their budding and soon to be flowering season, when all the desert cacti are resting. So it's important you obviously don't keep these dry over the winter months. And I do give a tiny bit of tomato feed, about quarter strength with these every third watering, just to help to encourage buds just at this time of year in the September. And I swear it does help to encourage more flowers anyway. These are beautifully blooming over the winter months when all the other cacti are pretty much, if not completely dormant. So it's important, if you have these cacti, do still keep watering them. And also, if you have them, such as I do here indoors in the kitchen, then if you're having lights on very early in the morning and of an evening when it's dark, it can prevent them from budding, because lights can confuse them. They work very much by the natural light. That's what encourages them. Now the light is dropping in the mornings and in the evenings, it encourages them to come into bud. And ideally they do prefer a bit of a cooler temperature of an evening. Obviously when you've got plants indoors and you can't freeze, so you need to have heating on, but make sure you sort of turn it off or down low in the evenings, because the cooler nights and the shorter days really help to encourage these gorgeous rainforest epiphytic Christmas and Thanksgiving cacti to come into their beautiful blooms. Now, if you've got any seedlings, young seedlings, If they're sort of less than 2 years old, I'd recommend bringing them indoors for the winter, because cactus seedlings, unlike mature cactus, don't like to be dry for too long. Once they sort of reach about this size, and yes, these are desperate to be repotted into their own pots, guys. Once they reach this size, they're absolutely fine to be overwintered at 5 Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit, because they're large enough to sort of go through the winter months without water, and they can then go, you know, into your normal growing place, whether it's the greenhouse or an heated room. But if they're young, if they're very young seedlings, I'd recommend bringing them indoors and still giving them a bit of light water about every 6 weeks, and keep them at a minimum temperature of 10 Celsius, 50 Fahrenheit. So I hope you found that video useful. Bit of tips there on all the little plant jobs you need to be doing now in the fall, autumn with your cacti. And if you haven't done already, then please do subscribe and click the notification bell. Do leave a comment in the comments down below, because every comment really helps the algorithm. And follow me on Insta and Facebook at Desert Plants of Avalon, and check my website out for regular blogs and growing tips on there, desertplantsofavalon.com. I want to wish you all an absolutely fantastic cactus powered day.